Hello, my name is Liam Dorsey, 28 years old. I am a freelance photographer living in Fairhope, Alabama, a small town on the shores of Mobile Bay where the streets are shaded by ancient oak trees and the air carries the faint scent of sea salt. Fairhope is as picturesque as a painting, with its white wooden houses, porches adorned with bougainvillea, and fiery sunsets over the pier. But beneath this serene facade, my family is a different story. A story full of pretense that I only came to recognize when it was already too late. I grew up in a family that, on the surface, everyone thought was perfect. My father, Mark Dorsey, owns a real estate agency, constantly bragging about million-dollar deals and his knack for reading clients. He has a dazzling smile, like something out of a toothpaste commercial, but I know that behind it is a man who only cares about his own wallet. My mother, Beth, is a kindergarten teacher, gentle, dedicated, but rarely daring to speak up when my father dominates every conversation. My Aunt Tracy, my father's younger sister, is a financial advisor, sharp-tongued and always skilled at making others feel small. Then there's my Uncle Frank, the youngest of my father's siblings, who works at a bank and is so pragmatic that I sometimes wonder if he even has a heart. And at the center of it all is my grandmother, Helen Dorsey, an 86-year-old widow who once ran a small community library before retiring. She is the only light in this family, but sadly no one seems to notice her except me. I'm not the type to dwell on family matters, but to understand this story, you need to know what our family gatherings are like. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, we would gather at my grandmother's ancestral home, a 2-story wooden house at the end of an oak-lined street with creaky old windows and a garden full of roses that she tends to daily. My father would arrive impeccably dressed in a suit, shaking hands as if meeting business partners. My mother would quietly set the table, occasionally glancing at my grandmother with an apologetic look but never saying a word. Aunt Tracy would sit at the corner of the table, scrolling through her phone, occasionally tossing out a snide remark about my grandmother still holding on to this outdated house. And Uncle Frank? He'd show up late, with a cheap bottle of wine as a gift, then quickly pull my grandmother aside to discuss borrowing money always. Just this one time, Mom. As for me, I'd usually sit next to my grandmother listening to her stories about her youth, when she worked as a librarian, organizing reading sessions for the town's children, or how she and my grandfather built this house in the 1960s. She has a kind smile and pale blue eyes like the sea, but I could always sense a deep sadness within them. Once she held my hand and whispered, "Liam, you're the only one who truly sees me." I laughed, thinking she was just joking, but looking back now, I realize it was the truth. I don't live with my grandmother. My small apartment is in downtown Fairhope, just a few miles from her house. I make a living as a photographer, mostly shooting landscapes and portraits, occasionally taking on projects for travel magazines. The work is enough to get by comfortably, but not extravagantly. I love the freedom, wandering country roads with my camera, capturing the moment sunlight filters through leaves or the smile of a child playing on the beach. But every week I make time to visit my grandmother. Sometimes I help her water the garden, sometimes I drive her to pick up medication, or we simply sit and drink tea while she tells me stories. Those moments to me are worth more than any photography contract. But my family is different. To them, my grandmother is a burden, an elderly woman living in an outdated house, no longer useful. I remember one Christmas party when Aunt Tracy loudly complained, "Mom, you should sell this house and buy a small apartment downtown for convenience. Why keep it? It's just a money pit for maintenance." My father nodded in agreement, while my mother just looked down, quietly cutting the cake. My grandmother didn't respond, only smiled, but I noticed her hands trembling as she poured tea. I wanted to speak up, to tell them to stop, but I was only 22 at the time, too young to confront the entire family. I just held her hand under the table, hoping she could feel that I was there, that I cared. What haunts me most is knowing that my grandmother doesn't just have this house. She has something valuable, Not cash or gold, but a portfolio of shares in a healthcare company that my grandfather invested in back in the 1980s. I only heard her mention it once when I was helping her organize some papers. She said, "Liam, these things don't matter to me, but remember, true wealth isn't something you can hold in your hands." I nodded but didn't fully understand. I thought she was just being philosophical, as older people often are. But then I started noticing signs. Uncle Frank kept asking her about her investment accounts, his tone unnaturally sweet. Aunt Tracy offered to help manage her assets, claiming it was because she was getting old and easily deceived. Even my father, who's always too busy, suddenly took an interest in renovating the ancestral home, suggesting it be sold to invest in something more profitable. I began to feel suffocated. Every family gathering felt like a play performed over and over. Everyone pretending to care about my grandmother, but in reality just waiting for her to pass so they could divvy up her assets. I hated the way they looked at her, as if she were merely an obstacle to their wealth. I hated myself too for not having the courage to stand up and call them out. Then one day, everything changed. It was Thanksgiving when I was 27 years old, a year before the events that led me to write this story took place. As usual, the family gathered at my grandmother's house. The table was set, the aroma of roasted turkey filled the air, and the warm glow of yellow lights illuminated the old wooden walls. My father, as always, launched into a story about a massive real estate deal he had just closed. Aunt Tracy was busy boasting about a wealthy client she had advised. Uncle Frank, with a cheap bottle of wine in hand, laughed loudly and made a joke about needing a little help from Grandma to pay off his debts. My mother, as usual, quietly poured water and smiled. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, her frail hands resting on the tablecloth, her eyes silently observing everyone. I sat beside her, trying to strike up a conversation, asking about the roses that had just bloomed in her garden. She smiled, but I noticed that her smile wasn't as warm as it used to be. There was something different, as if she were holding on to a secret, something she had been thinking about for a long time. I wanted to ask more, but the noise from my father, Aunt Tracy, and Uncle Frank drowned out my thoughts. They were arguing about the booming real estate market, and my father, as usual, bragged about a beachfront property he had secured at a bargain. My mother sat silently, placing a piece of turkey on her plate, her eyes avoiding everyone. That Thanksgiving dinner didn't seem any different from the others, at least not at first. My grandmother's old wooden house was still filled with the scent of pumpkin pie and roasted turkey, the soft yellow light from the antique chandelier casting a glow on walls weathered by time. But the atmosphere was heavy, as if we were all acting in a play none of us truly wanted to be part of. I glanced at my grandmother, hoping to catch her eye, but she just quietly sipped her tea, her lips pressed tightly as if weighing something in her mind. "Liam," she whispered, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear her clearly. "Do you see it? They're here, but none of them are really here." I froze, unsure of what she meant. "Grandma, they're just busy," I replied, trying to find an excuse to comfort her, though I didn't even believe my own words. She shook her head slightly, her pale blue eyes seeming to look through me, through the entire room, to a place I couldn't yet reach. The meal continued with my father's loud laughter and Aunt Tracy's endless stories about her wealthy clients. Then, like a bolt of lightning in a clear sky, everything changed. My grandmother set her teacup down on the table, the faint clink of glass against wood loud enough to silence the room. All eyes turned to her, not out of concern but out of surprise. She had never done anything to draw attention at family gatherings. She was always the listener, the one who smiled, the one who let others talk without protest. But this time, something was different. Her frail shoulders straightened, her gaze sharper than ever. "I have something to say," she began, her voice low but firm, like someone who had made an unchangeable decision. My heart beat faster, though I didn't know why. My father stopped chewing, leaning back in his chair with a half smile, as if expecting a joke. Aunt Tracy raised an eyebrow, setting her phone down on the table, Uncle Frank stopped pouring wine, and my mother gripped her spoon tightly, her eyes filled with worry. "I've been thinking for a long time," she continued, her voice ringing through the now silent room, "about what I'll leave behind. This house, what your grandfather and I built, and the shares I've held onto all these years." I saw my father sit up straighter, his eyes lighting up like a wolf catching the scent of prey. Aunt Tracy crossed her arms, a mocking smile flickering across her lips. Uncle Frank tried to hide his excitement, but I saw his hand tremble as he set the wine bottle down. "I've made a decision," she said, pausing to look at each of us. "I'm not leaving anything to my children or grandchildren. All of my assets, the house, the shares, everything, will be transferred to an organization in Fairhope that cares for the elderly. They'll use it to build a place where people like me, the forgotten ones, can live with dignity in their final years." The room fell into a heavy silence, as if all the air had been sucked out of the space. I felt the blood in my veins stop flowing. I looked at my grandmother, searching for a sign that she was joking, but her gaze was unwavering, resolute. This was no joke. This was the truth, and it was like a bomb exploding in the middle of the dining table. My father was the first to break the silence. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he shouted, standing up, his voice trembling with anger. "You can't do that. That's family property. You're going to throw it all away to strangers?" Aunt Tracy chimed in, her voice sharp as a knife. "You've been tricked, haven't you? Someone's convinced you to do this insane thing. You need a lawyer right now." She was practically yelling, pointing at my grandmother as if she were a child who had misbehaved. Uncle Frank, usually calm and composed, couldn't hold back either. "Mom, what are you thinking? We're your children. You can't abandon us like this. You're not in your right mind, are you?" His voice faltered as if he were trying to convince himself that my grandmother was no longer sane. I sat there, stunned, unsure of what to say. I wanted to defend her, to stand up and yell at my family that they had no right to accuse her. But I couldn't. My tongue felt tied and my heart pounded, not out of anger, but because I could hear the pain in her voice. She wasn't just making a statement about her assets. She was declaring her loneliness, the way this family had treated her for years. My grandmother didn't flinch. She looked each of them in the eye, her gaze fearless. "I've thought about this for a long time," she repeated, her voice calm but sharp. "You've never truly cared about me. You come here, say sweet words, but I know what you want. I don't want this wealth to fall into the hands of people who only care about money." My father slammed the table so hard that the glasses shook. "Enough, Mom. This is betrayal. You can't do this to your family. We won't let this happen." Aunt Tracy nodded, her eyes blazing. "We'll have you evaluated for mental competency. Clearly, you're not sane enough to make decisions like this." Uncle Frank muttered something about needing to find a lawyer immediately. I looked at my grandmother, waiting for her to react, to argue, or at least explain, but she only smiled. A sad, almost compassionate smile. "I've made my decision," she said, then stood up and walked out of the dining room, leaving the family in a storm of anger and confusion. I sat there, feeling as if I'd been swept into a whirlwind. I wanted to run after her, to ask why, to tell her I was here, that I wasn't like them. But my feet felt nailed to the floor. The shouting of my father, Aunt Tracy, and Uncle Frank blended into a cacophony of greed and hurt. That night, after the family had left, leaving the house in a mess of dirty dishes and accusations, I stayed behind with my grandmother. She stood on the porch, looking out at her rose garden under the moonlight. I approached, unsure of what to say. "Grandma, are you okay?" I asked, my voice faltering. She turned to me, her eyes gentle but resolute. "I'm fine, Liam. But you? Are you ready to stand up for what's right?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there, looking at her, feeling an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. I knew from that moment everything in my family had changed forever. And I, whether I wanted to or not, was being pulled into the center of the storm. The days following Thanksgiving passed like a somber dream. My grandmother's old wooden house, once a place where I found peace, now felt like a fortress besieged by silence and resentment. My family, the people I once called kin, turned their backs on her so quickly I could barely comprehend what was happening. Her phone, which rarely rang to begin with, now sat completely silent. Not a single message or call from my father, mother, Aunt Tracy, or Uncle Frank. They vanished, as if my grandmother no longer existed. I drove to her house one Saturday afternoon carrying a bag of groceries, bread, milk, and a few apples she liked. The road to her house was still picturesque, lined with ancient oak trees stretching endlessly, but that day I couldn't enjoy the scenery. My mind was consumed with the image of my grandmother standing on the porch that Thanksgiving night, her eyes resolute yet filled with loneliness. I wondered if she regretted saying those words. Did she feel abandoned, the way my family was abandoning her? When I knocked, she opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been standing there waiting. "Liam," she said, her smile gentle but her eyes weary. "You're here." "Grandma, I brought some groceries," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful, but my heart tightened at the sight of her. She was thinner, her small shoulders almost lost in her oversized sweater. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, but a few strands fell loosely across her forehead, as if she no longer cared about appearances. She led me to the kitchen where the faint scent of chamomile tea lingered. I set the bag on the table and started unpacking, but my eyes couldn't leave her. She moved slowly, as if each step carried a sorrow she didn't want me to see. "Are you okay, Grandma?" I asked, though I knew her answer wouldn't be entirely true. "I'm fine, Liam," she replied, sitting down and clutching her teacup. "It's just quieter than usual." Quieter was her way of describing abandonment. I knew it, and it made me angry. "Grandma, why are they doing this? Dad, Mom, Aunt Tracy, Uncle Frank, they can't just turn their backs on you because of this." She looked at me, her gaze gentle but piercing, as if she had seen through everything long ago. "Liam, people only show their true selves when they don't get what they want. I don't blame them, but I don't regret it either." I wanted to scream, to say they didn't deserve to be her family, that they were greedy and selfish, but I only clenched my fists, trying to suppress my anger. "You're not alone," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm here. I'll always be here." She smiled, this time a real smile, though still tinged with sadness. "I know, Liam. You've always been special." In the weeks that followed, I tried to spend more time with her. I turned down a few photography contracts to visit her more often. I drove her to doctor's appointments, helped her water her rose garden, and sometimes just sat with her on the porch listening to stories about her youth. She spoke of my grandfather, of the days they built this house together, of how he planted a young oak tree in the backyard to remind us that everything needs time to grow. I listened, trying to memorize every detail, as if I feared one day she'd be gone and these stories would be all I had left. But I couldn't ignore the change in her. She still smiled, still spoke gently, but there was a shadow in her eyes, as if she carried a burden she didn't want to share. One day, while helping her clean an old bookshelf in her small library, she suddenly stopped and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Liam," she said, her voice low but steady, "if I'm not here one day, what will you do?" Her question stunned me. I replied, "Don't say that, Grandma. You're going to live a long time, I know it." She shook her head, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm not talking about living or dying. I'm talking about standing up even when no one stands with you. Can you do that?" I wanted to answer, to say I could, but something in her voice made me hesitate. I only nodded, hoping she didn't see the doubt in my eyes. One rainy afternoon, when I came to take her to the grocery store, she handed me a small, worn wooden box, intricately carved with roses. "This is for you," she said, her voice light as a breeze. "But don't open it now. You'll understand later." I took the box, feeling its weight in my hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like I was holding a secret I wasn't ready to face. "Grandma, what's in it?" I asked, trying to sound casual to hide my unease. She only smiled, her eyes holding something profound, almost mysterious. "You'll understand later," she repeated, then turned away, as if she didn't want me to ask more. I tucked the box into my bag, but it felt like a stone weighing on my heart. I began to feel uneasy, as if she were preparing for something I couldn't foresee. Every time I looked at her, I saw that look, tired but resolute, like someone who had seen the world crumble but still stood firm. As the days passed, the silence from my family grew more oppressive. I heard from an old friend that my father had started spreading word around town that my grandmother was losing her mind and had been deceived by a charity. Aunt Tracy called me once not to check on Grandma, but to probe whether I knew anything about her plans. "Liam, I'm your aunt. I just want what's best for the family. If she's really going through with this crazy idea, we need to stop her," she said, her voice sweet but cold. I hung up, unwilling to hear more. Uncle Frank was worse. I once overheard him talking to my father. "Our mother's gone crazy, I swear. She wants to give everything to a bunch of old folks. I'll sue if I have to." His voice was thick with anger and greed. I turned away, feeling as if someone had stabbed me in the chest. I felt trapped on an invisible line. On one side was my family, people I once loved, people I thought would always be my blood no matter what. On the other was my grandmother, the woman who taught me to see the world through her stories and her roses. I didn't want to choose, but I knew I couldn't stay on the sidelines forever. Every time I saw my grandmother, her smile grew more fragile. She still tended her garden, still brewed tea every afternoon. But I could feel the loneliness clinging to her, like the shadows of the oak trees in the yard. I wanted to do something, to shout to the world that she didn't deserve to be treated this way. But all I could do was stay by her side, hold her hand, and hope it was enough. The small wooden box sat in my desk drawer, unopened as per her wish. But it was there, a reminder, a question I wasn't ready to answer. She had given it to me for a reason. And what was that reason? I didn't know. All I knew was that in my heart I had chosen to stand by her, even if it meant facing my entire family. And then, like a cold wind sweeping through Fairhope, everything turned worse and crumbled as quickly as a sandcastle washed away by the tide. That morning I woke up with an inexplicable restlessness. It felt as if something heavy was pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe evenly. On instinct, I grabbed my phone and dialed my grandmother's number. It rang once, twice, then 5 times, but no one answered. I called again, my heart beating faster now, but there was still only the hollow sound of the ringing. "She's probably in the garden," I told myself, trying to push away the growing unease in my chest. But the feeling clung to me like a cold wind slipping through the cracks of my jacket. I jumped into my car and sped through the oak-lined streets of Fairhope. The wind rushed through the open window, carrying the scent of sea salt, but I had no mind to enjoy it. My heart pounded as if it might leap out of my chest. When I turned onto the road leading to her house, the wooden house came into view, as peaceful as ever, but something felt off. The front door was slightly ajar, and the backyard garden, where she usually tended her roses, was strangely silent. "Grandma!" I called out, my voice breaking as I stepped out of the car. I ran straight to the garden, my shoes crunching on the gravel path. And then I saw her, lying motionless among the rose bushes, her watering can tipped over beside her, water soaking into the soil. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, her frail hands limp as if she were merely sleeping. But deep down, I knew it wasn't sleep. "Grandma, Grandma, please!" I shouted, dropping to my knees beside her, grasping her hand. It was cold, as if life had left her long ago. I pressed my ear to her chest, hoping to hear even the faintest heartbeat, but there was nothing. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves and the shattering of my own heart. Trembling, I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services. "Please, come quickly. My grandmother, she's unconscious, on Magnolia Street, the wooden house at the end of the road." I don't remember what else I said, only that I held her, whispering, "Grandma, please don't go, please don't leave me." The ambulance arrived quickly, but to time stretched endlessly. The paramedics placed her on a stretcher, attempting to revive her, but their eyes told me everything. When we reached the hospital, the doctor only shook his head. "Stroke," he said, his voice low and somber. "She was gone before we arrived. I'm so sorry." I stood there in the cold hospital corridor, feeling as if the world had collapsed. My grandmother, the woman who taught me how to love, how to see the world through stories and roses, was gone. I hadn't had the chance to say goodbye, to tell her I loved her, that I would always stand by her. I called my family, my voice choked with tears, hoping they would come, that they would share this pain. But my father only said curtly, "I'm in a meeting, Liam. Can you handle it?" Aunt Tracy said she was in Atlanta and couldn't come right away. Uncle Frank muttered something about coming when he had time. Only my mother, over the phone, her voice trembling, said, "Liam, I don't know what to do. Just do what you think is right." What I thought was right. I wanted to scream at them, to ask why they could abandon her even after she was gone forever. But I had no strength. The pain in my heart was too vast, like a black hole swallowing every emotion. All I knew was that I had to do one last thing for her, even if I was alone. I arranged the funeral myself. No one in the family helped. No one asked. I chose a small funeral home on the outskirts of Fairhope, with a yard overlooking Mobile Bay, where she used to take me to watch sunsets when I was a child. I wanted her funeral to be simple, like the way she lived, unpretentious, authentic. I selected an oak coffin with a rose carved in the corner and placed a bouquet of white roses from her own garden on top. I wrote the obituary and published it in the local paper, hoping someone would remember her, the woman who brought knowledge and kindness to the entire town. On the day of the funeral, a light rain fell, as if the sky were weeping too. I stood in the funeral home beside her coffin, waiting. A part of me still hoped, even faintly, that my family would show up, that they would come to say goodbye. But the funeral home's door remained shut. Only 3 people came: Mrs. Margaret, an old friend who worked with her at the community library; Mr. Henry, the florist at the market where she bought seeds; and Miss Ellen, a retired teacher who attended her reading sessions. They hugged me, offered words of comfort, and shared memories of her, how she patiently taught a child to spell, how she gave books to poor families, how she always smiled despite life's hardships. Helen was a special woman, Mrs. Margaret said, her eyes brimming with tears. She always put others before herself. I nodded, fighting back my own tears. Yes, she was the most special person I've ever known. The funeral passed quietly. A pastor read a few prayers, and I stood to say a few words about her rose garden, the stories she told, how she taught me that kindness was the only wealth that mattered. But inside I felt an indescribable pain. Not just because she was gone, but because she left in loneliness, abandoned by her own family. I looked at the coffin, imagining her smiling, her pale blue eyes looking at me as if to say, "You did well, Liam." When everyone left, I stood alone in the funeral home. The rain continued to fall, pattering on the roof like a mournful song. I placed my hand on the coffin, whispering, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't make them change, but I promise I won't let you be forgotten." On the way home, I stopped by Mobile Bay, where she used to take me when I was young. I pulled the small wooden box from my bag, my fingers tracing the carved roses. I still hadn't opened it, as if doing so would force me to face a truth I wasn't ready for. But I knew sooner or later I would have to. Not out of curiosity, but because it was what she wanted. That night, I sat in my apartment, the dim light casting shadows on the box on my table. I thought of her, of the days we watered the garden together, of her smile, of how she faced the entire family without fear. I thought of my family, my father, mother, Aunt Tracy, Uncle Frank, who didn't show up, didn't shed a single tear. My heart was heavy, but not with regret. I had done the right thing, even if I was alone. And I knew somewhere my grandmother was watching me, smiling. But that fragile peace was shattered one Wednesday morning when I received a call from Mr. James, my grandmother's lawyer. His voice was low and solemn, as if delivering a proclamation. "Liam, there's a reading of the will this afternoon at my office. Helen requested that you be there. Don't be late." I nodded, though he couldn't see, feeling another cold gust of wind sweep through me, carrying a premonition of something about to explode. The lawyer's office was in downtown Fairhope, a small building with glass doors and polished brass plaques. When I walked in, the air felt strangely stifling. And then I saw them. My entire family, the ones who had vanished on the day of her funeral, now filling the room. My father, in a pristine suit, arms crossed with a smug smile as if he'd already won a game. Aunt Tracy, her hair meticulously styled, scrolled through her phone, but with cold, sharp eyes. Uncle Frank sat in a corner, fidgeting, his fingers tapping his knee as if he couldn't wait any longer. My mother was the only one who looked at me, her eyes briefly showing guilt before she quickly looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Liam," my father said, his voice sweet but calculated. "You're here. Good. Today we'll settle this once and for all." "Settle what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my blood was boiling. They didn't attend her funeral, didn't shed a single tear, and now they were here, like vultures waiting to pick at the remains. "The estate, obviously," Aunt Tracy cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. She couldn't have been serious about that ridiculous idea. "We're her family, we have rights." I wanted to scream at them, to ask how they dared talk about rights when they had abandoned her. But I only clenched my jaw and sat down in the empty chair at the end of the room. Mr. James, the lawyer, walked in, holding a thick stack of documents. He wore glasses, his stern gaze sweeping the room before he sat down. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but commanding enough to silence the room. "Today, I will read the last will and testament of Helen Dorsey, drafted 3 months ago and legally notarized." My family sat up straighter, their eyes gleaming like predators. My stomach churned. I didn't care about the estate, but I was afraid. Afraid that she had made a mistake, that she had left something to those who didn't deserve it. I thought of the small wooden box, still in my drawer, and wondered if it was connected to this. Mr. James began reading, his voice resonating in the quiet room. "I, Helen Dorsey, of sound mind and clear heart, declare this to be my final will." He went through the legal details, then paused, clearing his throat. "All of my assets, including the house on Magnolia Street, the portfolio of medical shares, and the nursing home bearing my name, will be left to one person, my grandson, Liam Dorsey." The room froze. I felt the blood drain from my face, my head spinning. I looked at Mr. James, hoping he'd say something more, that this was only part of the will. But he only nodded at me, his eyes confirming I hadn't misheard. Only I, was to inherit everything. My father broke the silence. He shot up, his face red, pointing at Mr. James. "What, is this a joke? Liam, that kid? My mother couldn't have done this." His voice trembled with anger, but I could hear desperation too. Aunt Tracy practically screamed. "No way. She was out of her mind. Someone manipulated her. Liam, did you do something?" She turned to me, her eyes blazing as if I were the traitor. Uncle Frank muttered, his voice thick with bitterness. "I knew it. I knew she'd do something crazy. But to leave it to Liam, a kid who takes pictures for a living? That's absurd." My mother said nothing, her head bowed, her hands clenched tightly together. But I saw her shoulders tremble as if she were holding something back. I wanted to stand up, to tell them I hadn't asked for anything, that I only wanted her to rest in peace. But I couldn't. I sat there, stunned, feeling as if the world was collapsing onto my shoulders. Mr. James raised a hand, signaling for silence. "This is Helen's wish, clearly written and notarized. There is no contesting it. Liam is the sole heir." My father slammed the table so hard the documents shook. "I'll sue. I'll take this to court. My mother wasn't in her right mind, and this kid must have manipulated her." Manipulated? I couldn't hold back anymore. I stood up, my voice shaking with anger. You didn't even come to her funeral. You abandoned her, didn't call, didn't check on her, didn't care. And now you dare say I manipulated her? Do you know how lonely she was? The room fell silent, but not because they agreed with me. My father looked at me, his eyes cold as ice. You think you're better than us, Liam? You're just a lucky kid. But you won't keep it. A nursing home? A pile of debt and trouble? You'll regret this soon enough. Aunt Tracy smirked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Congratulations, Liam. You've inherited a wreck. That nursing home isn't worth a dime. She sure knew how to punish us all. Uncle Frank shook his head, stood up, and walked out, muttering, I'm done with this game. Liam, you want that pile of garbage? Keep it. They left one by one, leaving me with Mr. James in the stifling room. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice softer. You were the one Helen trusted, Liam. Don't let their words shake you. I nodded, but inside a storm of emotions raged. A nursing home? I knew she owned a small facility, but I never thought it was part of the will. I had assumed it was just a charitable project she invested in. But now, it was mine, along with the house, the shares, and a responsibility I didn't fully understand. Driving home through Fairhope's familiar streets, everything felt foreign. I thought of her resolute eyes when she declared she'd leave nothing to the family. I thought of the small wooden box still in my drawer like an unsolved puzzle. And I thought of the nursing home, a place my family called a wreck, but one she chose to entrust to me. When I stepped into my apartment, the dim light fell on the box on my table. I sat down, my fingers tracing the carved roses. For the first time, I felt a powerful urge to open it. But I stopped. Not now. Not when I was still reeling from what had just happened. I knew somewhere my grandmother was watching me. And I knew this story wasn't over. The nursing home, the will, the box. They were all waiting for me to uncover. But this time I wouldn't let her down. The days following the reading of the will felt like I was standing in a maze with no way out. The nursing home my grandmother left me, what my family called a wreck, was now my responsibility. I had never imagined owning such a place. I was a photographer used to wandering with my camera, capturing fleeting moments of light and shadow. Managing a nursing home, that was an entirely foreign world. I decided to visit the place, at least to understand why she chose it for me. The nursing home was on the outskirts of Fairhope, a low, weathered building with faded white paint and a small sign reading Helen's Haven Nursing Home. Her name, etched on the sign, made my heart clench. I walked in, unsure of what to expect. A long hallway, the faint smell of disinfectant and the soft murmur of a few staff members chatting at the reception desk greeted me. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair in the corner, staring out the window with a distant look. An old man read a newspaper, his glasses slipping down his nose. I'm Liam Dorsey. I introduced myself to the woman at the desk, who looked about 40 and wore a light blue scrub. I'm the one who inherited this nursing home. She looked up, her eyes briefly widening in surprise before breaking into a warm smile. Oh, you're Liam. I'm Susan, the manager here. Helen talked about you a lot. She talked about me? I asked, feeling like I'd been pulled into a story whose chapters I didn't yet know. Susan nodded, leading me to a small office at the end of the hallway. Helen loved this place. She'd visit often, talk to the residents, bring books to read to them. She said you were the only one in the family who understood the value of kindness. I sat down, feeling as if a weight had settled on my chest. But why did she leave this place to me? I don't know anything about management or caring for the elderly. I'm just a photographer. Susan smiled, her eyes full of empathy. Helen believed you'd figure it out, but I'll be honest, it's not easy here. We're short on funds, the building needs repairs, and some staff have left because of low wages. Without changes, we might have to close within a year. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked around the office, a worn wooden desk, dusty bookshelves, and a framed photo on the wall. my grandmother standing among a group of elderly people smiling radiantly. That was the grandmother I knew from my childhood when she ran the community library, when her smile could warm the entire town. I don't know where to start, I admitted, my voice faltering. My family says this place is a burden. Maybe they're right. Susan leaned forward, her eyes serious. Liam, Helen didn't think so. She poured her heart into this place. She said it wasn't just about caring for the elderly. It was about giving them a place to live, to be respected. Will you try? For her? I didn't answer right away. My mind swirled with questions. How could I run a place like this? I had no money, no experience, nothing but a camera and a heart full of confusion. But then I thought of her resolute eyes when she faced the family. She chose me. Not my father, not Aunt Tracy, not Uncle Frank. Me. I'll try, I said, my voice soft but firm. But I'll need time. Susan nodded, handing me a stack of documents. This is the home's operational file. Read through it, and if you need me, I'll be here to help. That night, I brought the documents back to my apartment and spread them out on the kitchen table. Numbers, invoices, reports. It was all like a foreign language. The nursing home was operating at a loss. The roof was leaking, the heating system was broken, and the staff list was half what it had been 2 years ago. My family wasn't wrong. This place was a wreck, at least financially. I felt overwhelmed, as if my grandmother had handed me a burden instead of a legacy. I glanced at the small wooden box on the table, still unopened. I wondered if it held answers or just another secret she wanted me to uncover on my own. I stood up, pacing my apartment, trying to find a spark in this chaos. But all I felt was helplessness. I had promised her I wouldn't let her down, but how could I keep that promise when I didn't know what I was doing? Then I remembered her words. True wealth isn't something you can hold in your hands. Was she talking about this nursing home? About the people there? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't give up. Not now. The next day, I returned to the nursing home carrying the stack of documents and a newfound determination. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wanted to understand why my grandmother chose this place, why she poured her heart into it. Susan greeted me at the reception desk and led me to a small room my grandmother had used as an office. The room was simple, with a wooden desk, an old computer, and a shelf full of dusty files. On the desk was another photo of her, standing with a group of elderly people holding a book, her smile radiant like the sun. I sat down and turned on the computer. The password was my birth date, a detail that made my heart clench. Among the folders on the screen, I found one labeled Helen's Notes. I clicked on it, unsure of what to expect. It was a long document written in her familiar voice, gentle but sharp, the way she spoke when she wanted me to understand something important. Liam, the document began. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But I want you to know that I didn't leave you a burden. This nursing home is my life's work, a place where I wanted to preserve a bit of kindness in an increasingly cold world. It will be difficult, but you'll see its value if you look deeper. I read on, her words echoing in my mind as if she were speaking to me. She wrote about how she used her entire savings to buy the nursing home under her own name because she wanted it to be a place where lonely elderly people were cared for with dignity, not just a place to wait for death. She described thank you letters from residents, from staff who had worked there, people who called her the one who brought light. She wrote about the days she spent sitting with them, reading books, listening to their stories, and how they taught her that life at any stage was worth cherishing. Then I found a stack of paper documents in the desk drawer, notes, letters, and old contracts. Among them was a letter from a healthcare investment fund offering to buy the nursing home for $4 million. The date on the letter was 2 years ago. She had declined, scribbling a note in the margin in her familiar handwriting. If it falls into the hands of the greedy, this place will disappear. But if the boy keeps it, he can do what this family never imagined. I was stunned. $4 million. This nursing home, the one my family called a wreck, sat on land that real estate corporations coveted. I flipped through more documents and found recent emails, one sent just days before she passed. Another offer from the same fund for an even higher amount. She hadn't responded, but I knew she would have refused again. I sat there in her small office feeling as if I'd uncovered a hidden treasure. Not the money, but her vision. She didn't just leave me a nursing home, she left me a mission. She wanted me to carry on her work, not for profit, but for the people here, for the values she believed in. But this treasure came with a challenge. I knew my family wouldn't let it go. They had mocked me, called the nursing home a burden. But if they learned its true value, they'd come back more ferocious than ever. And I, a 28-year-old photographer with a heart full of uncertainty, would have to face them. Not just to protect her legacy, but to prove she was right to trust me. I looked at the photo of her on the desk, her smile radiant like the sun. "Grandma," I whispered, "I'll try. I promise." But that promise, though sincere, couldn't dispel the growing unease within me. I knew my family, the ones who turned their backs on her, who laughed at me for taking on a wreck, wouldn't let this end here, and I was right. Just a few days later, news about the true value of the nursing home began to leak. I don't know how they found out, maybe a call from the investment fund, or perhaps someone in the real estate industry got wind of it. But when my father called me one morning, his voice no longer carried its usual mockery. It was cold, sharp, like a blade honed and ready. "Liam," he said without so much as a greeting, "we need to talk, right now, about that nursing home." I gripped the phone tightly, feeling my blood boil. "There's nothing to talk about, Dad. The will was clear. Grandma left everything to me." He laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "You think you can keep that gold mine all to yourself? That's family property, Liam, not yours alone." I wanted to scream at him to remind him that he had called it a wreck just days ago. But I held back, my voice calmer than I expected. "Dad, if you cared about family, you would have come to her funeral." There was silence on the other end, but I knew it wasn't remorse. It was calculation. "You'll regret saying that," he said, then hung up. Less than a week later, I received a letter from my father's lawyer, not Mr. James, but a stranger from Mobile with stiff, threatening language. The letter demanded I reconsider ownership of the nursing home, claiming that my grandmother was not in a stable mental state when she wrote the will. They threatened to take the matter to court, accusing me of manipulating her to seize the estate. I read the letter, my hands trembling with anger. Manipulated? Me? The only one who stood by her when the entire family turned their backs? Aunt Tracy was the next to reach out. She showed up at my apartment one evening unannounced, dressed in an expensive suit with a fake smile. "Liam, I just want to talk," she began, sitting on my sofa as if it were her office. "We're family. We should share, right? That nursing home? It's worth millions. You can't keep it all." I looked at her, searching for a trace of sincerity, but all I saw was greed in her eyes. "Aunt Tracy, do you know what she did for that place? It's not just about money, it's her legacy." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Legacy? Liam, don't be naive. It's real estate, an opportunity. If you don't want to cooperate, we'll have to do this the hard way." The hard way she mentioned became clear soon enough. Uncle Frank, usually the quietest, sent me a long text message going on about how he always loved Mom and only wanted to protect the family's assets. He ended with a thinly veiled threat. "Liam, don't let this get ugly. We can sue and you'll lose everything." My mother was the only one who didn't join the attack. But she didn't stand by me either. I returned to the nursing home, bringing the letters and notes I'd found in my grandmother's office. They were my weapons, proof that she was lucid, resolute, and knew exactly what she was doing. Among the documents was a handwritten letter from her tucked in the pile as if meant for me alone. "Liam, they'll try to take what I left behind. But you must be strong. Not for the money, but for the people who need this place. I believe in you." I read the letter over and over, feeling as if she were right there, holding my hand, giving me strength. I called Susan, the nursing home manager, and told her what was happening. She listened, then said, "Liam, Helen knew they'd do this, but she also knew you wouldn't give up. We'll support you, whatever it takes." I started preparing. I contacted Mr. James, my grandmother's lawyer, and showed him all the documents, from her letter to the contracts refusing to sell the nursing home. He nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "We have enough evidence to prove Helen's wishes were clear. Your family won't be able to claim anything, you can rest assured." That night I sat in my apartment, the small wooden box before me once again. I still hadn't opened it, but this time I felt closer to being ready. I knew it might hold her final answer, something to help me face the storm ahead. I placed my hand on the box, whispering, "Grandma, I won't let them destroy what you built." The battle with my family didn't unfold in a courtroom as I had feared. Instead, it was a series of arguments, threats, and tense meetings at the lawyer's office. But with Mr. James's support and my grandmother's documents, I held my ground. Her letter, her notes about her vision, and the history of rejecting buyout offers proved beyond doubt that she was fully lucid and had her reasons for choosing me as her heir. My family, though bitter, eventually backed down. My father left Fairhope, declaring he wanted nothing more to do with this town. Aunt Tracy and Uncle Frank fell silent, turning their attention to other opportunities. My mother, though she didn't say much, sent me a message. "I'm proud of you, even if you don't think so." But that victory didn't bring relief. I knew the real responsibility was just beginning. The nursing home, Helen's Haven, wasn't just a piece of land worth millions. It was my grandmother's life's work, a place where she wanted lonely elderly people to live with dignity and respect. And I, despite never imagining myself doing this, decided not to sell it. I began to rebuild. With Susan and a few dedicated staff members, I repaired the roof, upgraded the heating system, and hired more employees. I used nearly all the medical shares my grandmother left me to cover the costs, knowing it was a financial gamble. But every time I walked into the home and saw the residents' smiles or heard their stories, I knew I was doing the right thing. I renamed the home Maria's House after my grandmother's full name, Helen Maria Dorsey. I wanted the name to be a reminder, not just to me, but to the entire community, of the woman who spent her life bringing light to others. I expanded the home, turning it into more than just a medical facility, but a community hub. I organized reading sessions, invited young people from town to talk with the residents, and started an art program where they could paint or do crafts. I hung the photos I took, moments of the residents laughing, sunlight streaming through windows, throughout the hallways, transforming the place into a true home. One afternoon, while hanging a new photo in the common room, Susan approached me, smiling. "Liam, you've done it. Helen would be so proud." I looked around, seeing residents playing chess, an elderly woman telling a story to a young volunteer. "I just hope I'm worthy of her," I said, my voice low. That night, I returned to my apartment and finally opened the small wooden box. Inside was a letter, a simple silver ring, and a small key. The letter, written in her familiar handwriting, began, "Liam, if you've opened this, I know you're ready. The ring belonged to your grandfather, who taught me about kindness. The key opens a safe in my office where you'll find what you need to carry on. I believe in you." I held the ring, feeling its smooth surface under my fingertips. It wasn't shiny or valuable, but it was my grandfather's, the man she said taught her that kindness could change the world. The key rested in my palm, small but heavy, as if it unlocked not just a safe, but a future I hadn't dared to imagine. I sat there in the quiet apartment, the dim light falling on her letter. I read it again, feeling her gentle but resolute voice in my mind. The next morning, I drove to Maria's house, the name I gave the nursing home to honor my grandmother, Helen Maria Dorsey. Her small office was unchanged, with the wooden desk, the photo of her with the residents, and the dusty bookshelf. I found the safe in the corner, hidden behind an old curtain. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. With a soft click, The door swung open. Inside was a stack of documents, a small notebook, and another carefully folded letter. I opened the letter first, my heart pounding. "Liam," she wrote, "if you've found this, I know you've chosen the right path." The notebook contains my plans, not just for the nursing home, but for Fairhope. I wanted this place to be more than a home for the elderly, but a place to connect people, young and old, rich and poor. The documents are what you need to continue. Be strong as I know you can be. The notebook was a treasure trove of ideas. She had meticulously written out plans, a small library in the nursing home, workshops where young people could learn from the elderly's experience, and even a community garden where everyone could grow flowers and vegetables together. Each page was a dream, written in her careful handwriting, as if she had spent hours envisioning a future she knew she wouldn't live to see. The documents contained contracts, permits, and a small fund she had quietly set up, not millions, but enough to sustain Maria's house for a few years if managed well. She didn't leave cash or gold, but a vision, a responsibility, and the belief that I could make it real. I sat in her office feeling as if the world was watching me. I thought back to those early days when I was confused, overwhelmed, thinking the nursing home was a burden. But now, I understood. She didn't leave me money or property. She left me a mission, a responsibility not just to Maria's house, but to its people, to Fairhope, and to myself. In the months that followed, I poured my heart into Maria's house. With Susan and a new team of staff, I began bringing her ideas to life. We opened a small library where residents could read and tell stories to the town's children. We held workshops where the elderly taught crafts, and young people brought music, art, and stories of their generation. The community garden became a reality, with rose beds like her own where residents and volunteers planted, laughed, and shared together. One day, while helping an elderly woman plant a bed of daisies, an older man arrived at the home. He walked slowly, his eyes distant as if used to being forgotten. I smiled, approached him, and introduced myself. "Hello, I'm Liam. Welcome to Maria's house." He looked at me, then at the sign out front where my grandmother's name was proudly engraved. "Maria," he murmured. "She was a special woman, wasn't she?" I nodded, feeling my heart warm. "Yes, very special." I showed him the library, the garden, and the smiling faces of those living there. He smiled for the first time, and I knew this was what she wanted. A place where everyone at any stage of life felt they mattered. My story ends one afternoon standing under the Maria's house sign, sunlight filtering through the oak trees, bathing me in golden light. I looked up at the sign, her name shining like a reminder. "I won't let you be forgotten," I whispered, feeling as if she were somewhere, smiling at me. Maria's house wasn't a treasure of gold or money. It was a legacy of kindness, connection, and people uplifted by those who came before. And I, Liam Dorsey, a photographer who once thought he only knew how to capture light through a lens, now understood that true light is what you create for others. I wore my grandfather's silver ring, feeling its weight like a promise. And I walked into Maria's house ready for a new day, new stories, and the legacy she entrusted to me.